Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Laura Mahoney. I'm president of the Sacramento Press Club, and I'm a reporter for Bloomberg Law. Thank you for coming. Before we get started, I just want to make a couple quick announcements. I want to thank Aaron Reed and Associates and Marketplace Communications for sponsoring today's luncheon. Their sponsorship helps the Sacramento Press Club fulfill its mission of providing scholarships to aspiring journalists and our commitment to informing and educating our members and the public through luncheons like this one. Also, thank you, John. Also, you can buy your tickets now for our next luncheon on August 23rd, when we welcome Academy Award-winning actor Jeff Bridges in his role as spokesman for No Kid Hungry, a nonprofit organization focused on ending child hunger in the United States. Bridges will be part of a panel discussion moderated by KCRA anchor Edie Lambert. So make sure you go to our website and buy your tickets now. They're going fast. Now on to today's discussion with Senate President Pro Tem Tony Atkins and Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon. Thank you so much for coming. Moderating today is John Myers, who is Sacramento Bureau Chief for the Los Angeles Times. John spent more than 2 decades in radio and television news prior to joining the Times in 2015. He has spent much of his career as an award-winning reporter covering State House policy and politics, and I must note he is a former president of the Sacramento Press Club.
Yeah.
Welcome, John, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. I haven't done anything at a press club luncheon in a very long time. I'm super excited. And you're not complaining about desserts, which is what we used to complain about the old days, or many of the 19 million venues that we tried to hold the events in. So thanks for having me to have a conversation with 2 people who have nothing on their calendar for the month of August. Just, lollygagging around as they come back to Sacramento. They don't need a ton of introduction, but of course, as you know, immediately to my left is the President Pro Tem of the State Senate, Tony Atkins, Democrat of San Diego, who served as Speaker of the Assembly before that and had a long political career in San Diego. And off to the side here, looking skeptical is the way I will describe him, is the Speaker of the State Assembly, Anthony Rendon, a Democrat of Los Angeles County. Are you D Paramount or D Lakewood these days?
I'm D Lakewood now.
You're D Lakewood?
Yeah.
You were just D Paramount.
I know. I want to keep them guessing,
These are not the things I worried about in broadcasting, but in print, I have to get that right. So, and of course, has had a long career working on a number of issues in Sacramento, came to prominence on water issues before being elected Speaker, and of course has been Speaker for some time. You are sort of the senior leader of the 2, except, of course, that she preceded you as Assembly Speaker. So
right.
I'm going to start with her.
Wonderful.
That's what happens. But, I think there would be people in the audience who think it would be crazy for me to start with something other than what's going to happen in the next 23 days, which is exactly why I'm going to start with something other than what's going to happen in the next 23 days. As a way to get into this, you've just arrived back in Sacramento after a month-long recess, so this is the easiest question of the entire conversation. Senator Atkins, what'd you do on your summer vacation?
Well, if you follow me on Instagram, you know that
Plug.
I did a 13-state tour of Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Nebraska, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, California.
That's impressive.
Right. I saw some moose. That was great.
And you were on stage
in
Nashville, right? Instagram, right?
Instagram.
Okay.
Yes. He offered to let me sing, but I thought better of that. So.
And Mr. Speaker, how did you spend your summer vacation?
Not nearly as interestingly. I read a lot. My wife is working on her doctorate, and she was in final exams, so I helped her get through that.
What did you read?
I read Chemistry by Weiki Wang, which won the Hemingway Pen Award for first-time author. I was going to read Gertrude Stein's Making of an American, but it's 900 and some pages, so I just reread Tender Buttons by her, which is 100. And then is your colleague Melanie Mason here?
No, she's not.
Okay, because she
Shout out.
recommended an author and I hate the book. Donna Tartt, Goldfinch. She recommended there's a disagreement between us.
Book.
She said she recommended that I read Donna Tartt, any Donna Tartt book. I bought Goldfinch. I texted her saying, I hate this book. And she said, I hated it too. She said, you should have read one of her other books. So I'm about halfway through that. And I'll finish it just so I can mock Melanie.
We should write that down as
Yeah,
well.
exactly.
All right, so let's get to what's going on this month. I mean, we've got a lot to talk about, not only what's happening this month, but kind of a little bit of what has happened in 2018. And of course, it's a 2-year session, so I have a feeling we're going to talk a little bit about what the legislature's been doing the last couple of years. This is a bit of another bit of a softball, but as you're looking at the to-do list for the rest of this month, there are a number of things on it. But what's at the top of the to-do list? Mr. Speaker, we'll start with you. What's at your top priority in the legislative session 3 weeks?
Well, I think bail reform is something that we as a legislature and we as a House have been wanting to get done for quite some time. There's a bill over on our side. I know that there are probably discussions going on right now as we speak about possible amendments. It's something that I consider to be not only obviously a criminal justice issue, but an economic justice issue. That'll be hugely important. Obviously, the wildfire issue and trying to unravel that. We have a conference committee that's meeting again later this week to try to unravel some of those issues. I think those are the big issues we'll be looking at, the large sort of thematic issues.
Madam Pro Tem?
Well, I have to agree, and I'm happy to hear that bail reform is top of the list. We've had some conversations, of course, and we have, obviously, both of us have members, Mr. Bonta, Mr. Hertzberg, who have really championed this, and this has been a long discussion, so I couldn't agree more. It's one of the priorities, and as well, I can't disagree about wildfires. Obviously, we've got few weeks left. It may seem like 23 days is a very long time. I would say it's long and it's short all at the same time. And we really have a lot of work to do to get through this difficult discussion around how we're going to address and prevent going forward what we are all now calling the new normal.
Right. So I'm going to spend some time on wildfires and the wildfire legislation, the conference committee, but because both of you flagged bail reform, let me just jump in with that for a moment, back to it. Bail reform is something that a lot of people have talked about for a long time. We believe in. How you define the reform is obviously the sticky part of this. Whether you completely move away from the cash bail system, whether you do something that's incremental or slight step toward that way. But it's also difficult to get consensus with law enforcement and the groups who support people of lower economic means who feel most unfairly taken by the current bond system. What's the secret sauce to this for you?
Well, you've framed it accurately. I mean, we had hearings last year and maybe the year before on this issue, and it was interesting that there was bipartisan agreement that the current system is unfair. I'm hoping to move away from the cash bail system entirely, whether or not we do that right away or whether or not we do it incrementally. I think that's something we'll decide in the next 3 weeks. But certainly moving away from the cash bail system eventually is something that I'd like to see us do.
Mm-hmm. Madam Pro Tem, you.
Well, I agree. Maybe you'll get to something we disagree on eventually. Probably not.
Hold on a second.
You'll work on that. I actually think, it is certainly complex, and particularly when you have a number of stakeholders that have conflicting perspectives. And I think the hardest part has been diving into the code and trying to figure out, how to do this in a way that you get broad consensus. But I think at the end of the day, we need to do what's right by people who are really disadvantaged and are the least likely to be able to pay. We know that it disproportionately affects some communities over others, and I think it's just an issue of social justice. I agree, and we need to fix it.
But let me take this moment, which I think will be a transition to other topics as well, to point out the fact that there are only about 23 days left in the calendar before you go home. And this is a frequent topic of conversation in this town about why we end up at the 11th hour trying to strike major deals that are hugely complex. And bail reform is not a small issue, as are the others I'm trying to talk about. And I wonder where you put the worry or the potential criticism that you're doing it wrong because you're doing it so fast versus the need to do something.
I don't think we're doing it fast. I think this has been a matter of discussion for a number of years. And, whether it is a good thing or a bad thing, we have learned here that there is nothing like the last minute to get things done. It is the tension and the natural pressure that comes from having a limited amount of time to get something done. So I would say we have done a lot of work on this. We have done a lot of research on this. So it isn't just something that's going to happen at the last minute. It may come together at the last minute, but I think you find frequently that's what happens when we're dealing with real serious issues, because that's what forces the parties to realize we do want something done. And it really puts us on the spot to move on.
Slightly different tack, Mr. Speaker, before I move to the other policy issues. The procedural rules of 3 days in print now, the Prop 54 72-hour rule, helped or hurt that process at the end of session?
I'm not sure that it's done either. It seems as though the Wednesday is the Friday now. It seems like
the Tuesday is the Friday.
The Tuesday is the Friday, yeah. The Tuesday, I'm good at math. It seems like the Tuesday is the Friday now, and we have to kind of get stuff done on that Tuesday in the last couple of days, or maybe matter of sort of slogging through a lot of bills rather than having to worry about the architecture. But I don't, it's, as the pro tem said, maybe it's human. I mean, I worked in academia where students were doing their papers at the last second. I worked in the nonprofit sector where people are, finishing grants at the last second. Maybe there's something relating to human nature, but
the consequences are bigger.
The consequences are, the consequences are much bigger. But I mean, I think the extent to which things may, quote unquote, get done at the last minute just happens 72 hours earlier.
Okay. So let's talk about wildfires. We've said that we were going to talk about it. We're in a state of crisis in a number of places in the state. Obviously, the folks in Redding and in Lake County have seen a tremendous amount of this. We've had Southern California, and of course some of that in the last few hours even toward the Inland Empire. A lot of the discussion at this point, when we look at that conference committee, while it talks about wildfire prevention, it's really focused a lot on liability issues, and it's come back to the utility companies. What is the number one thing that has to come out of this for you? Because I want to talk about the governor has a proposal and a couple of things in a moment, but what's the number one thing that has to come out of this? There are people who say the utilities need to be given some sense that they can move forward in this very different climate, and I'm talking climate of the planet, not the political climate, though I guess it could be both. There are homeowners and property owners who are worried about what their needs are. There's the cost of firefighting. There's timber management. Obviously, there are a hell of a lot of things here. Mm-hmm. What has to come out of this for this to be a success? Either one of you jump in.
Well, I think the focus has to be on moving forward. The focus has to be on preventing fires moving forward. A lot of that is related, obviously, to forest management. A lot of that is related to the way business is done with respect to the utilities. There are a lot of other factors. I've been very clear. We're not going to bail out PG&E or anybody else. This is about moving forward, and this is about looking at the future of fires and of fire management, and of making sure that some fires will occur in the future. Yes, we understand that, but to try to minimize those.
You know this well in San Diego, Madam Pro Tem.
Absolutely. I feel like we kicked the ball and got it started a decade ago. And I think that's why you see that San Diego Gas and Electric has really done a lot to try and address some of the issues, to be prepared. And in so much as even monitors in certain areas where fire danger is significant. I mean, their central system is incredible if you get a chance to go see it. But I do agree with Mr. Speaker. This is going to be a shared responsibility, shared pain. It is about prevention. We put this year into the budget more than we have ever put before. If it were a simple matter of money, we at least had it this year, the resources to put towards fire services. But unfortunately, that is not the whole story. It is every single one of the issues you mentioned, whether it is its prevention, it is our mutual aid system that we haven't yet gotten into, about it being stretched to the very limit. That is our firefighters out there, and we've lost firefighters. So I think it is every part of what you mentioned going into the question, and what movement do we want to see? We need to see some movement on each of these issues. And of course, there are numerous stakeholders, and we have to keep in mind the ratepayers. I mean, that is, that's got to be paramount. Ratepayers, public safety, protection, and we really have to look at our state-of-the-art system, which is now being stretched to the gill. These are not easy conversations.
You did not mention in that list the utility companies.
Well,
and so, to that point, sorry if I just jump in, but to that point, the utility companies say, we need to change the system of inverse condemnation. I love phrases that I never thought I would say in this job. It used to be ERAF, and it was Test 3, and now it's inverse condemnation. But they want a different system. They think the legal structure of responsibility is too much of a burden, too onerous for them in the climate change universe that we're in with these fires. Do they deserve a second look? And I'll start with you, ma'am, and then go.
Absolutely, thank you. The utilities are key and central to this conversation, because we need a reliable and secure grid and structure to provide energy. However, there has got to be shared responsibility. I agree. We are not here to bail out any industry, but we do have to take a hard look at it. If these were simple decisions and conversations, we would have probably already addressed most of this. But it's not simple, and this is going to be probably about the toughest topic and issue, because there are so many stakeholders, and really at the end of the day, it does have to come down to public safety, protection of the ratepayers, and how all of the stakeholders are going to come to the table with something to offer in terms of how we solve this problem. Now, that sounds really good in a nice little package of conversation, but it's going to be really painful.
What do you think of the governor's proposal? Mr. Speaker, I can pivot it to that part of this in particular. He is proposing a restructuring of that inverse condemnation universe.
I think he has, and I think that's something that the working group is going to look at. And I really don't want to get ahead of their work. They're meeting again, I believe, tomorrow. Today's Wednesday. They're meeting again tomorrow. I don't want to get ahead of their work. Again, if there's anything that's focused on moving forward, I'm interested in at least having the discussion.
What about PG&E's proposal to securitize the debt that they may face so far? There's a bill, one of your members of your caucus has it in front of him. You support that bill?
I don't take public positions on bills until they get out of the appropriations
Do you
committee.
support the concept?
I understand PG&E's argument.
And what do you think about that argument?
I'll let you know after the bill gets out of the appropriations committee.
Will it get out of the appropriations committee? You just said after it gets out.
I don't know, she isn't here. I don't see the appropriations chair.
That's the beauty of politics. It's a great, we'll see.
I mean, I'd hit that sucker a couple more times, that topic, but I won't. Madam Pro Tem, what do you think about the idea of helping these utility companies, whether it's PG&E or someone else?
I think you have to define what help means. I said everybody needs to come to the table and bring something to the table. And I think that all of the pieces that have been put forward need to be on the table for the discussion. Now, whether that's how it comes out, that's why we have a conference committee. It's why we have a proposal from the governor, something for people to react to. People expected him to give a proposal, he did, and now you're going to see a reaction, and that's what the discussion is all about. And I agree wholeheartedly with the speaker that you have to let that process work. and that we as leaders cannot be ahead of the process. It really undermines the conversation and discussion that our colleagues are seriously trying to have.
But if I may say for a moment, again, this is a process observation about the way the state capitol works. You saying that is somewhat different than your predecessors. You would speakerize a bill, you'd pro temize a bill, and we eyesed a bill. But your predecessors would throw people in a room, right? Twist some arms, make something happen. Neither of you are talking that way about a topic like that. Why? Because some people say, great, they've really democratized the process. Others say they have no control of their caucuses.
I think the stuff that we've gotten done this year alone, whether it's an incredible budget that we passed where we devoted $500 million to homelessness, our early childhood education investments, our rainy day fund. I think that speaks for itself in terms of our leadership and our quote unquote control over the caucus. That being said, we know we're in a different era. The extension of term limits to a 12-year to a 12-year, potentially 12 years for all of us, has changed these leadership positions to a great degree. And I think the pro tem and I are both cognizant of that and respectful of that.
We talk about another issue that's been front and center this summer, and that's immigration and immigration enforcement and the issues of families separated and the detention process. And I'm curious as to whether you see a role for California beyond what we have done on some of these topics, and what could you do in the next 3 weeks to speak out about that? Madam Pro Tem, I'm reminded in particular, tell the audience, I went down to see Senator Atkins in her district. I walked around her neighborhood with her. She was kind to show me like her favorite place here, I got lots of tips about the South Park neighborhood, so that's another, I used to say it's another podcast, but we're not podcasting. But when we were having a conversation down there, something that stuck with me. I asked you about Trump and about the Trump administration, what you could do, and you said, I learned, back when I was a kid, you don't poke a bear for no reason. You don't needlessly poke a bear. But is this a place where the state needs to do more, needs to stand up more? Is there something we can do in these final weeks, given what has been going on this summer?
Well, I think we have, and I want to commend Speaker Rendon and Pro Tem Emeritus Kevin De Leon for making a very important statement after the election, which was our immigrant communities and families are a big part of California. They are our residents. I mean, I'm just sort of taking liberties here, but that statement was very powerful, very strong, and very necessary. I don't consider that poking a bear. I consider that being responsible to your residents who were afraid. And there needed to be a comment. And I think the measures that we have taken, SB 54, responsible action taken that does not protect criminals, but does protect families. And I think in terms of the next 3 weeks, it's a short time, and recognizing that Tuesday, Friday thing, I do think if there's something more we need to do, I think we will work together to do it, and I don't think that's poking the bear. I think it's being responsible to our residents, and I think we have done a lot. We have put resources together. We have made the statements we need to say. We have supported SB 54. The courts have proven that we are pretty much on solid ground, so I think we are working to do everything that we can to support our residents.
Anything additional on this topic you'd like to see in these last weeks, Mr. Speaker?
We're definitely, first of all, I agree with the stuff that the pro tem has said, and there's a difference between poking a bear that's perhaps sleeping and not doing anything, and a bear that's poking you and your family. I think that's the distinction here. We're very supportive of the Attorney General and all of his efforts. Our caucus is huddled on this issue, and we had a resolution sort of denouncing this action. And what was really interesting was the bipartisan nature, not only of that debate, but also of the vote around that. And I think it says a lot about our Republicans, and I think really the true nature of conservatism. I don't think Donald Trump is a conservative. I have friends and colleagues in our legislature who are conservative. Donald Trump is not a conservative, he's something else. But I think it's quite clear that we're doing a lot, and as the pro tem said, we'll continue to do more.
You are policy leaders, but you're also political leaders of the California Democratic Party and leading Democrats in the country as a result, given the size of the state. Talk politics for a moment, both of you, for a minute, and the fall elections, the midterm elections, and I'm casting a wide lens here, or wide net, so to speak, in terms of the national dynamic, what Democrats can do. There's also a conversation about Democrats overplaying their hand or playing the wrong message in this particularly divisive time that we live in. What do you think the outcome looks like? What can Democrats do to, take back control of one or both houses in Congress? It's not your house, of course, but being political strategists, play it out for me for a moment.
I think this question, to an extent, I think begins with the previous question. We've seen last night in Ohio, the results there, all over the country, really. We've seen that Donald Trump has kind of thrown a lot of districts where Democrats have traditionally not been competitive. They're suddenly quite competitive. That being said, we can't talk only about Donald Trump. And I think that's where, and I was at the National Council of State Legislators last week, I think that's where California has an important story to tell. It's one thing to just spend all of our time trashing Donald Trump. That's probably a good way of getting people's attention, but that's not enough. To talk about what we've done as a state, whether it's the $15 minimum wage, whether it's cap and trade, whether it's all that we've done with respect to early childhood education, I think people want to know what you've done affirmatively. So for us, our message as a caucus is going to be, yeah, we hate Donald Trump and we're opposed to everything that he's in favor of, but look, here's this alternative vision. This is what we're doing. And oh, by the way, while we're doing this, we're also building a rainy day fund of $18 billion and being fiscally responsible.
Madam Pro Tem, what do you think about that messaging for Democrats?
I think that we have to talk to our constituents. I think we have to be focused on communication and the work that we do with communities. There's a reason I spend time going to communities when I go home. I have 131 community meetings in my district, and it's a very, it's a district that expects your attendance. And in my conversations with my communities, that's exactly what they want to know. What is California doing? And many of them do not like the divisive conversations going on. They're not into Twitter messages from, in terms of, the rhetoric. They want to know what you're doing. They want to know that you're doing the job they elected you to do. And I think that needs to be our message, because on the ground, when you see some of the races that have been taken back in New York, it is about a person who was connected to her community and was out there having conversations aside from all of the chaos and chatter and politics. And now, that's very local focused, but I think people in this day and time want their elected officials to lead. They want you to be authentic and truthful. And I think we give a good counterbalance to the message coming out of the White House right now.
I want to use your phrase of authentic and truthful, or authenticity and truthful, and I'd add maybe accountable, to talk about something that comes back to Sacramento. We have spent the better part of a year, if I can roll back to the time of the fall of 2017, where we started to have a conversation here that was part of a national conversation about sexual misconduct in the workplace. Both of you, let's be honest, have had members of your caucuses who have left Sacramento in the wake of some of that conversation. And I'd like you to talk, Madam Pro Tem, maybe you begin, and then Mr. Speaker from there, talk about the state of that topic as far as it relates to the legislature's ability to hold its employees and its members accountable, and to be open with the public about when those problems pop up.
Mm-hmm. I think I want to commend Senator Holly Mitchell and Assemblymember Friedman for leading the effort in terms of the work that we need to do. I think change has to happen. I think it isn't just about policies and procedures that you put into place, how you do the investigations, who does the investigations. It's about the follow-through. And I think real change does not happen overnight, but you do have to You do have to set the tone, and then you have to live it, you have to implement it, and you have to see it through, and that takes time. And I think that we've done that. I really think our process to evaluate, and I want to remind people that these are employment issues, these are HR issues, and you can sort of differentiate elected officials from staff, because we have a responsibility to the staff to make it a safe work environment, one in which they feel appreciated, that they have the ability to grow personally and have a career without fear. And I think that we have started, I feel good about what we've done, but really the test is going to be over time. We've done a climate survey as a baseline. We expected that not to be good. And actually, it was better than we thought in terms of why people work in the Capitol, that they love the work, they love their job. They actually like their supervisors, but they do want to see an investment in their growth. And so we're doing that. Elected officials are a little different. They are elected by the people, and I think any reticence you've seen in terms of how we try to grapple with that is that we recognize that an individual has been elected by their community, and yet when there is something that is not okay in terms of behavior and you investigate it, you have to take the action. You have to take the action. And I think we've done that, and it has been painful and hard, but I think it has been a good process, and I think we have more work to do. And I look forward. I think the relationship that the speaker and I have, we've talked about this multiple times. We are committed to making this, certainly both houses to participate so that there's consistency and that our mutual employees feel safe and that we are responsible. And in terms of the accountability, we are putting out information as it relates to the outcome of the elected officials and high-level staff members on sexual harassment discrimination.
Mr. Speaker, you want to weigh in before I follow?
I'm incredibly proud of the work that Ms. Friedman and Ms. Mitchell did, and that we did as a legislature. I think the hardest thing for any organization at all, the management of any organization, is to give up power, and we did. We gave up power, and a lot of these the investigations and decisions are now going to be made by an independent body. We did that because we wanted to do better, because we knew that we have a problem, like so many institutions in our society. We know we've had a problem with sexual harassment in our building as a workplace. So we did what I think all responsible legislatures do. We had a series of hearings. We heard best practices. And I think what surprised people was that we not only did we hear from folks, but we followed best practices and adopted a best practice that really takes the power out of the hands of the pro tem and I, because that's the right thing to do. And Ms. Friedman was at a convention recently with these legislators from all over the country, and she talked about what she had done, and they mobbed her and said, how were you able to do this? And it is ultimately, I think, perhaps going to be our this year's biggest accomplishment. There's been a pall over the Capitol this year. It's been a difficult year, but having this come out of this year and having this come out of that committee, I think says a lot about our members.
So really quickly on this topic, and I got a couple more, and you guys have your own questions. I won't forget them. But I do want to talk about this topic in two parts. One thing that is continually talked about is, well, this is actually there's more than one part to this, sorry. There's a culture issue. There's a culture of the workplace. And part of that culture is a discussion of whether there's fear. There's fear of coming forward. There's fear of retribution that's not easily identifiable. Do you think you've changed that already or not?
Absolutely not. No, culture takes a long time, and you're right. I watched all of the hearings, and every person who testified said what you just said. The culture has to change. It's one thing to change policies and procedures. That's good, and that's a start. but ultimately nothing changes until the culture changes. No, that cultural change takes a while, but I think we're, as the pro tem said, I think we're starting that process.
And, it won't be done overnight, and I think we have to continue to evaluate every circumstance. Our Rules Committee, which I chair, is hearing all of these after the investigation is done and it comes back to us. We are monitoring every piece of it because I don't want to be lulled. I think we have done incredible work together. But if we get lulled into the sense of we've done it, it's done, that's not enough because it's going to take practice. It's going to take practice and a consciousness that we haven't had. And we need to really look at ourselves over these next few years. And I'm really excited about the possibility that we have, the speaker and I have the ability, working with our colleagues, to actually see it through. And we have to prove to our staffs in the building that we are committed for the long haul. And I think it's really easy to forget. And what I keep trying to tell anybody that talks to me, it isn't about you over there and the action that you took and we're following. It is about me right here. And every single interaction and every single way I approach a situation, it has to be internal. It has to be individual. And we have this moment in time to do it. And we can be a leader and we can be an example.
So there's an accountability inside the building, but I want to jump with the accountability outside the building. I want to ask you a more direct way of this. There is discussion among some that the Legislative Open Records Act needs to be modified. It needs to be amended. It needs to be updated. It needs to be more transparent. I can tell you as a 17-year member of this press corps that I have had exactly 0 Legislative Open Records Act requests granted prior to this conversation that we've been having. There was a bill to modify the Legislative Open Records Act to codify some of what his internal practice now. Does the Legislative Open Records Act need to be modified? Is it truly transparency given it's different than the standard held to every other agency in the state, every local government in the state?
Well, I think you've seen the legislature move. I would also say a part of this is that these are HR issues, and we have a responsibility as an employer. We are unique. I grant you that. We're the legislature, we're unique, and we're finding in that uniqueness how we address these issues has been difficult.
But why are you unique, Madam Pro Tem? I mean, because these are records that are available in other parts of local government.
Well, I would say how transparent is the media on their issues around sexual harassment?
We could be, but we're not elected officials.
So we are held to a higher standard.
Yes,
we
you are.
And we're held to a higher standard to not only provide transparency and information, which I believe we've worked very hard to do. We have had internal discussions and released much more. But we also have a responsibility to protect employees as well. It's a balancing act. I'm sure the press would like everything we do, but there is issues of privacy, there's issues of security and protection, and I think we try to balance those issues as well.
Mr. Speaker, just really briefly, the bill I referenced did not move forward in your House.
This is the Mark Stone bill?
Yes.
Yeah, we had the committee on sexual harassment that I talked about, and we didn't want to get ahead of that committee. We held a bunch of bills, and that was explained to all of the authors in our caucus early on. We have this committee that's going to look at our internal policies and procedures as relating to sexual harassment, and anything that interferes with that would interfere with the work of the committee. We didn't want to do that.
Real quickly before we get to the audience, I'm going to have one more conclusion thought, a broader one if I can, for you. There is an election this November. You're going to have a new governor. You're going to work with a new governor. I think I know who both of you think that new governor is going to be. But can you talk about the relationship with the executive branch, the governor, and the legislative branch? In the earlier era of term limits, when members moved through the legislature so fast, the executive branch seemed to have a little bit more power, in my observation, than the legislative branch. And legislators were gone, and governors had a longer term. And this governor in particular has a unique long view of California. What do you think that working relationship is between the two branches? What do you think, will it change at all with the new governor because you guys have been around longer? He's somewhat the new kid on the block. That could be either he, by the way, relative to Jerry Brown. What do you think about that broader structural relationship between the two branches?
We are talking about Travis Allen, aren't we?
Someone will tweet that now.
Clearly. One of the things I talked about earlier today, and I think the pro tem and I either talk about it or it's sort of silently sort of always out there, is the extension of term limits, the fact that we're going to be here for 12 years. I think that definitely changes the balance of power, whether it's Jerry Brown, Gavin Newsom, or John Cox. John Cox? Cox. John?
That's him.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is it?
that's
Yeah.
it.
I
So
knew
you
his
just
last-
made
I got
your
his
own
last-
headline now.
I got his last
Speaker
name.
Rendon didn't know the whole name of the Republican candidate.
I
for
got his
governor.
last name.
He's still betting on Travis.
Who can see past Travis? It's the glare.
You two could go on forever, please.
I think ultimately the balance of power is going to change. And as somebody who taught political science for a long time, I think no matter who it is, that's a good thing. Legislatures are I used to always say this when I would teach, legislatures are the most democratic branch. They're the closest to the people. It's a good thing for the legislature to be empowered. I had a great meeting with Gavin Newsom a couple of days ago on policy issues. He's completely aligned with, I shouldn't say that, he's largely aligned with us. That's another policy, that's another tweet, right? He's largely aligned with us. I see very few areas where we're going to disagree on implementation of those types of things, yeah. But ultimately, I think I do see the balance of power changing just because we've been here for a while, we're going to be here for a while.
Senator Atkins, you want to take a quick thought, and then we'll go to the audience?
Well, every administration is different, and we've had 8 years with Jerry Brown. I've had 8 years with Jerry Brown, and that's been interesting to say the least. I've enjoyed it as Speaker and as Pro Tem. But, the other thing I'm really looking forward to, since I get to be here with Speaker Rendon, is our relationship as a legislature. Usually you've got the Senate, the Assembly, and the governor. And even if you've got all Democrats, it can be quite an interesting dynamic. Yeah. And I think one of the things I am excited about, and I said when I was sworn in, I have a good relationship with the Speaker. And we are really hoping to work together. And I think that's going to add a dimension to this that you'll enjoy watching maybe in the next few years, whoever is governor.
Or in the next 3 weeks, green carpet, red carpet fights.
Well, green actually is my favorite color, but I look good in red, so.